The gun under the table was already cocked. The man holding it? Don Salvatore, the ruthless patriarch of the most dangerous crime family in New York. The restaurant was silent. Terrified silence. Everyone knew that one wrong move meant death. Then, the shy, trembling waitress dropped a spoon. The Don's eyes snapped to her, his face twisting into a snarl. He muttered a curse in a dialect so old and specific to the Sicilian mountains that no one in America should have understood it. But then, she answered him, in the exact same dialect. The room didn't just freeze, it stopped breathing. Who was this girl? And why did the Don suddenly look like he'd seen a ghost? This is the story of Asha, the waitress who was hiding a secret worth killing for. The restaurant, Il Destino, wasn't just a place to eat. It was a fortress of velvet and mahogany, a place where business deals were signed in blood and celebrated with vintage Barolo. For Asha, however, it was just a hiding place. Asha kept her head down. That was rule number 1. Her uniform was always pressed, her apron spotless, and her dark hair pulled back into a severe, nondescript bun. She wore no makeup, spoke only when spoken to, and moved with the silent efficiency of a ghost. To the wealthy patrons of Manhattan's Upper East Side, she was furniture. To the manager, Mr. Hensley, she was a reliable mute who never complained about double shifts. But Asha wasn't just shy. She was terrified. Every time the heavy oak doors swung open, her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She wasn't supposed to be here. She wasn't supposed to be Asha, but survival required erasure. Table 4 needs a refill on the Pellegrino, hissed Jessica, a fellow server who spent more time adjusting her lipstick than working. And stop shaking. You're making the guests nervous. Asha nodded, keeping her eyes on the floor. Yes, Jessica. She moved toward table 4, but her path was blocked by a wall of black suits. The air in the restaurant shifted instantly. The ambient chatter died down, replaced by the clinking of silverware and hushed whispers. He was here. Alessio Conti, the Prince of New York. He walked in with the swagger of a man who owned the pavement he stepped on. He was tall, with shoulders that strained the fabric of his bespoke charcoal suit. His face was a masterpiece of sharp angles and cold indifference, framed by dark hair that curled slightly at the nape of his neck. But it was his eyes, amber, predatory, and devastatingly intelligent, that made people look away. Asha froze, clutching the water pitcher. She tried to step back into the shadows near the kitchen door, but it was too late. Alessio paused. He didn't look at the maitre d' who was bowing practically to his waist. He didn't look at the stunning model on his arm. He looked right at Asha. For 3 months, this had been their dance. He would come in every Tuesday and Friday. He would sit at the corner booth, table 10, the one with the best view of the exits, and he would watch her. He never spoke to her, never requested her as his server. He just watched. Mr. Conti, Mr. Hensley stammered, sweating visibly. Your table is ready. We have the special vintage you requested. Alessio ignored him, his gaze lingering on Asha for a second too long before he smirked, a tiny, terrifying twitch of his lips, and walked past. Asha let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. He likes you, Jessica whispered maliciously, as she breezed past with a tray of oysters. Or maybe he's just wondering why someone so plain is working at a place like this. Asha didn't answer. She couldn't explain that Alessio Conti looking at her wasn't a romantic fantasy. It was a death sentence. Men like Alessio didn't date waitresses. They hunted them. And if he looked too closely, he might see the cracks in her mask. He might realize that Asha didn't have a past before 3 years ago. The night wore on, heavy with the scent of truffle oil and fear. Alessio's table was quiet, radiating an intense gravity. He was meeting with two other men, Russians, judging by the harsh consonants drifting across the room. The bodyguards stood like statues against the walls. Asha stayed in her section, as far from table 10 as possible. She was wiping down a cleared table when she felt a hand on her shoulder. She jumped, nearly knocking over a wine's glass. It was Mr. Hensley. His face was pale, his eyes wide. "Asha," he choked out. "I need you to take table 10. "What?" Her voice cracked. "No. Jessica is serving table 10, or Mark. I'm not allowed near the VIPs. You said so yourself." "Jessica spilled wine on one of the Russians," Hensley hissed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "She's in the back, having a panic attack. Mark is serving the senator. You're the only one left who isn't an idiot." "Please, Mr. Hensley," Asha begged, her hands trembling. "I can't." "You can and you will," he snapped, "or you're fired. And I know you need this job, Asha. I didn't ask for your papers when I hired you, remember?" The threat hung in the air, cold and sharp. He knew. Not everything, but enough to know she was desperate. Asha swallowed the lump in her throat. She nodded once. "Okay. Good. They want the dessert menu and more grappa. Don't mess this up." Asha smoothed her apron. She took a deep breath, trying to steady her hands. "Just serve the drinks. Don't look him in the eye. Be invisible." She walked toward the corner booth. The air grew colder the closer she got. The Russians were arguing in low tones, but Alessio was silent. He was leaning back, one arm draped over the booth, watching her approach. When she reached the table, she kept her eyes fixed on the center of the tablecloth. "Excuse me," she whispered. "May I clear the plates?" The conversation stopped. The heavy silence returned. "You're new," one of the Russians grunted, eyeing her up and down. "No," Alessio said. His voice was deep, a velvet rumble that vibrated in Asha's chest. "She's been here for months. She just usually hides in the back." Asha felt the heat rise in her cheeks. He had noticed. She reached for a plate, but her hand shook. The fork slid off and clattered onto the china, a loud clink that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet dining room. The Russian laughed. "She is nervous, Alessio. You scare the women." "I scare everyone," Alessio replied calmly, his eyes never leaving Asha's face. "What's your name?" Asha froze. She couldn't speak. "The girl has no tongue?" the Russian sneered. "Asha," she whispered, forcing the name out. Alessio leaned forward. The shift in his posture was subtle, but it felt like a tiger crouching to pounce. "Asha," he repeated, testing the word. "You don't look like a Asha." I have the dessert menus," she stammered, placing them on the table with shaking hands. "And the grappa is coming." "I don't want grappa," Alessio said. "I want you to look at me." It was an order. Asha slowly lifted her head. Her brown eyes met his amber ones. For a moment, the restaurant disappeared. She saw something in his gaze, not just cruelty but curiosity and recognition. No, that was impossible. "Your hands are calloused," Alessio observed, his voice lower now. "For a waitress in a fine dining restaurant, you have the hands of someone who has worked in the earth, or with heavy ropes." Asha pulled her hands back as if burned, tucking them behind her apron. I do gardening. As a hobby." Alessio smirked. Gardening in a studio apartment in Queens? That's impressive. He knew where she lived. The blood drained from Asha's face. "Leave the girl alone, Alessio," the Russian said, bored. "We have business?" Alessio didn't break eye contact. "We're done with business. Get out." The Russians blinked. "Excuse me?" "Get out." Alessio didn't raise his voice, but the threat was unmistakable. The men stood up immediately, gathering their things and scrambling away without a backward glance. Now it was just Usher and the Prince of New York. "Sit," Alessio said, gesturing to the empty seat across from him. "I can't," Usher whispered. "I'll get fired." "I bought the building yesterday," Alessio said casually. "You won't get fired." "Sit." Usher sat. She had no choice. She was trapped in the orbit of a black hole. "Who are you really, Usher?" he asked softly. "Because I've had my men look into you. You don't exist before 2023. No social media, no family, no tax records. You just popped into existence." "I'm nobody," she lied, her voice steadying. "Just a girl trying to survive." Alessio studied her for a long moment. Then he reached into his jacket pocket. Usher flinched, expecting a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small, folded piece of paper and slid it across the table. "My father is coming to town next week," Alessio said. "Don Salvatore. He's old school. He hates everything about America. He hates this restaurant. He hates me, mostly. But he's coming to inspect my operations." Usher stared at the paper. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because," Alessio said, leaning in close, his scent of expensive cologne and tobacco enveloping her. "I need a personal server for him. Someone who is invisible. Someone who doesn't ask questions. Someone who is terrified enough to be obedient. I want you." "No," Usher said immediately. "I can't serve the Don." "It wasn't a request," Alessio said, his eyes hardening. "Do this and I stop digging into your past. Refuse, and I'll have my private investigator find out exactly why a girl with the hands of a laborer speaks French with a perfect Parisian accent when she thinks no one is listening." Usher stopped breathing. He had heard her muttering to herself in the pantry. "One night," Alessio said. "Next Friday. You serve my father. You keep him happy, and then you're free." He stood up, buttoning his jacket. He dropped $100 bill on the table. "See you Friday, Usher." Friday arrived with the weight of an execution. The atmosphere at Il Destino was hysterical. The kitchen staff was scrubbing surfaces that were already sterile. Mr. Hensley was on his third Xanax. The entire restaurant had been closed to the public for a private event. Don Salvatore Conti was not just a mob boss, he was a legend. A relic from the old country who ruled with an iron fist and a code of honor that was as bloody as it was strict. He hadn't left Sicily in 10 years. His arrival in New York was shifting the tectonic plates of the criminal underworld. Usher stood in the back, adjusting her uniform. She felt sick. She had spent the last week contemplating running, just packing her bag and disappearing to a new city, a new name. But Alessio's threat kept her grounded. If he was already looking into her, running would only confirm her guilt. She had to play the part of the scared, obedient waitress one last time. "Usher!" Hensley shrieked. "Check your apron. Is that a smudge? No, it's a shadow. Go! They're here!" The convoy of black SUVs pulled up to the curb. Security flooded the entrance. Men with earpieces and bulges under their jackets lined the walls. Then, the doors opened. Alessio entered first, looking more stressed than Usher had ever seen him. He wasn't the arrogant predator tonight. He was a son trying to manage a volcano. Behind him walked an elderly man, using a cane made of polished ebony. Don Salvatore was small, withered, and dressed in a suit that looked 30 years out of date. He wore a flat cap and thick glasses. He looked like a harmless grandfather. Until you saw his eyes. They were black, bottomless pits that scanned the room with utter contempt. "This is it?" the Don rasped in heavily accented English, looking around the opulent restaurant. "It looks like a whorehouse for politicians." Alessio clenched his jaw. It's a Michelin star establishment, Papa. The best in the city. Plastic, Salvatore spat. He walked to the main table, table 10, and sat down heavily. Bring me wine, not the piss you Americans drink. Real wine. Alessio signaled to the sommelier, who rushed over with a bottle of 1990 Brunello. Asha was standing by the service station, trying to blend into the wallpaper. Alessio spotted her. He gave a microscopic nod. It's showtime. She took a deep breath, grabbed the bread basket and the water pitcher, and walked toward the lion's den. The table was crowded. Alessio, Don Salvatore, and two of Salvatore's advisors from Sicily, men with leathery skin and scars. They were speaking Italian, fast and aggressive. This city is weak, Alessio, Salvatore was saying in Italian, banging his cane on the floor. You rely too much on technology, on bribes. In Sicily, we rely on respect, fear. Times change, Papa, Alessio replied in Italian, his tone strained. We have to adapt. Adaptation is for cowards, Salvatore sneered. Asha reached the table. She placed the bread down softly. Water? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Salvatore stopped talking. He looked up at her slowly. The silence that followed was suffocating. He stared at her face, his eyes narrowing behind the thick lenses. Who is this? Salvatore asked Alessio, switching to English but keeping his eyes on Asha. She looks like a starved rat. Asha flinched but kept pouring the water. She's the best server we have, Alessio said tightly. Leave her be. Salvatore huffed. He reached for the bread, tore off a piece, and chewed it unhappily. Then he muttered something. It wasn't Italian. It wasn't English. It was a dialect. Siciliano Antico. Specifically, a dialect from the region of Corleone, mingled with phrasing from the mountainous villages of the interior. A dialect that had mostly died out 50 years ago. It was the language of shepherds and bandits. Stupani sapi di cartone. I cani da massaria mangiano meglio. This bread tastes like cardboard. The dogs at the farm eat better. It was a test, a comment meant only for his advisors, a way to insult his son without Alessio fully understanding the depth of the slang. But Asha heard it, and without thinking, driven by a reflex buried deep in her childhood, a memory of a kitchen that smelled of oregano and gunpowder, she responded. She didn't speak on English. She didn't speak in standard Italian. She spoke in the exact same dying dialect. U pane è fatto oggi, Don Salvatore, ma forse vi manca u sale da terra vostra. The bread was made today, Don Salvatore, but perhaps you miss the salt of your own land. The words hung in the air like smoke. The fork halfway to Salvatore's mouth froze. One of the advisors dropped his napkin. Alessio looked at Asha, his eyes wide with genuine shock. He knew she spoke French. He didn't know she spoke this. The silence stretched for 10 agonizing seconds. Asha realized what she had done. Her hand flew to her mouth. Stupid, stupid. You just signed your death warrant. Don Salvatore slowly turned his entire body toward her. The contempt in his eyes vanished, replaced by a razor-sharp focus. He looked at her not as a waitress, but as a riddle. Come closer, the Don commanded. His voice was no longer raspy. It was steel. Asha didn't move. I said, come closer, he roared, slamming his hand on the table. Asha took a trembling step forward. Salvatore reached out and grabbed her wrist. His grip was surprisingly strong. He pulled her down so her face was level with his. He studied her features, the curve of her nose, the shape of her eyes, the set of her jaw. He was looking for something. Where did you learn to speak like that? He whispered in the dialect. That is not book Italian. That is not the tongue of the city. That is the tongue of my village. I learned from my grandmother, Asha stammered in the same dialect, tears welling in her eyes. She taught me. Who was your grandmother? Salvatore demanded. Just a woman, Asha cried. Please let me go. Salvatore didn't let go. He pulled her closer, his eyes searching hers. Then he looked at her wrist. The sleeve of her uniform had pulled back slightly. There, on the inside of her wrist, was a small, faint scar. It looked like a burn, shaped vaguely like a crescent moon. Salvatore gasped. He dropped her wrist as if it were red hot. He fell back into his chair, his face draining of color. He looked at his advisors, then at Alessio, and finally back at Asha. Alessio, the Don whispered, his voice shaking. Clear the room. Papa, what is— Clear the room! Salvatore screamed, his voice cracking with an emotion that sounded terrifyingly like fear. Everyone out, except her! The bodyguards moved instantly, ushering the confused and terrified staff out of the dining room. Mr. Hensley looked like he was about to faint. Within 30 seconds, the restaurant was empty. Just Asha, standing alone in the center of the room, surrounded by the 4 most dangerous men in the Mafia. Salvatore pointed a shaking finger at her. Tell me the truth, girl, he croaked. Your name is not Asha. Is it? Asha looked at Alessio. He was staring at her with a mixture of awe and suspicion. She looked back at the old man. There was no running now. The mask was shattered. No, she whispered, switching to perfect, unaccented English. My name is not Asha. She straightened her spine. The shy, trembling waitress vanished. In her place stood a woman with cold dignity. My name, she said, is Isabella Rossi. And you killed my father. The name Rossi hit the room like a physical blow. One of the advisors, a scar-faced man named Bruno, immediately reached inside his jacket. The glint of steel was visible for a fraction of a second before Alessio moved. With speed that belied his size, Alessio slammed his hand down on Bruno's forearm, pinning the gun to the table. The sound of heavy bone hitting wood echoed through the empty restaurant. No one shoots, Alessio commanded, his voice low and dangerous. Not in my city, not in my restaurant. She is a Rossi, Alessio, Bruno spat, struggling against the younger man's grip. You know the orders. The bloodline was to be erased. Tabula rasa. She is a waitress who just served my father water, Alessio countered, his eyes locked on Isabella. And she is unarmed. If you pull that trigger, Bruno, you won't leave this table alive. Don Salvatore hadn't moved. He was staring at Isabella. No, at Isabella Rossi, as if he were looking at a ghost. His face, usually a mask of stoic cruelty, was crumbling. His hands gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles white. Giovanni's daughter, the Don whispered. We were told she died in the fire. The report said a body was found. Small. Unrecognizable. You found the body of the housekeeper's daughter, Isabella said, her voice trembling with suppressed rage, but her chin held high. My mother hid me in the dumbwaiter. I listened to the fire roar. I listened to you laugh as the beams collapsed. She took a step closer to the table, ignoring the lethal tension radiating from the bodyguards. I was 6 years old, Don Salvatore. Do you remember? You used to bounce me on your knee when you visited my father for Sunday dinner. You brought me marzipan from Maturana, and then you burned us alive. Salvatore closed his eyes, a look of ancient pain crossing his face. Your father, Giovanni, he broke the omerta. He was talking to the magistrates. He betrayed us all. It had to be done. It was justice. It was a lie! Isabella screamed, the sound tearing through the elegant dining room. My father never talked. He was the only one loyal to the old ways. It was you who was selling out to the cartels. You killed him to cover your own sins. The accusation hung in the air. In the Mafia world, calling a Don a traitor was a death sentence. Bruno ripped his arm free from Alessio's grip and leveled his pistol at Isabella's chest. "Die, witch!" Bang! The gunshot was deafening. Isabella flinched, squeezing her eyes shut, waiting for the impact, waiting for the darkness. But it didn't come. She opened her eyes. Bruno was groaning, clutching his hand. His gun lay on the floor, smoking. Alessio stood with his own weapon drawn, smoke drifting from the barrel. He had shot the gun out of his own advisor's hand. "Are you insane?" Bruno howled, blood dripping onto the pristine tablecloth. "You shoot your own blood for this peasant?" "I gave an order," Alessio said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "I said no one shoots. You disobeyed the Don of New York." He turned to his father. Salvatore was looking at his son with a mixture of shock and calculating assessment. "She knows too much, Alessio," Salvatore said quietly. "She is a loose end, a thread that can unravel the whole tapestry." "She is an asset," Alessio corrected, holstering his weapon but keeping his hand near the grip. He walked over to Isabella, standing between her and his father's men. He was close enough that she could feel the heat radiating off him. He smelled of gunpowder and expensive wool. "How is she an asset?" Salvatore asked. "She wants us dead." "If she wanted us dead, she would have poisoned the wine," Alessio said. He turned to look at Isabella, his amber eyes searching hers. "She's been serving me for 3 months. She could have killed me 12 times, a knife in the back, glass in my food. But she didn't." He leaned in, close to her. "Why, Isabella? Why are you still alive? Why wait?" Isabella looked up at him. The fear was gone now, replaced by a cold, calculating resolve. She realized that her cover was blown, but she had one card left to play. "Because death is too easy for you," she hissed. "And because I don't just want revenge, I want my life back. And I have something you need." "We need nothing from you," Salvatore scoffed. "The ledger," Isabella said. The room went dead silent again. Even Bruno stopped groaning. "My father didn't just keep quiet," Isabella said, her voice steady. "He kept records, every bribe, every murder, every account number in the Cayman Islands from 1990 to 1998. You couldn't find it when you burned the villa, could you? You tore the walls apart, dug up the cellars, but you never found Giovanni's black book." Salvatore's face turned an ashen grey. "The ledger, it was a myth." "It's real," Isabella lied. Or maybe she wasn't lying. The conviction in her eyes was absolute. "And I know where it is. If I die, it goes to the FBI. If I disappear, it goes to the FBI. If you touch a hair on my head, the Conti family ends." Alessio stared at her. A slow, dark smile spread across his face. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a man who had just found a diamond in the mud. "You're playing a dangerous game, Asha," Alessio murmured. "My name is Isabella," she corrected him. "Right now," Alessio said, grabbing her arm. "Your name is Prisoner, but a very valuable one." He turned to his father. "Papa, get in the car. Go to the safe house in the Hamptons. Take Bruno and get him stitched up." "And you?" Salvatore asked suspiciously. "I'm taking the girl," Alessio said. "She's coming to the penthouse. I will get the location of the ledger, and then we decide her fate." "Be careful, my son," Salvatore warned, standing up shakily. "A woman who waits 20 years for revenge is more dangerous than a loaded gun. She has the Sicilian madness in her blood. Just like us." Alessio looked at Isabella. "I'm counting on it." The drive to Alessio's penthouse was a blur of neon lights and rain. Isabella sat in the back of the armored Maybach, sandwiched between 2 silent guards. Alessio sat in the front passenger seat, speaking in low, rapid-fire Italian into his phone, organizing the fallout at the restaurant. Isabella's mind was racing. She had bought herself time. But at what cost? The ledger was a half-truth. Her father had kept records, yes, but she hadn't seen them since she was a child. She had a key, an old, rusted iron key she wore on a chain around her neck, hidden beneath her uniform. She hoped it led to the ledger. If it didn't, she was dead. The car pulled into the underground garage of a needle-thin skyscraper in Midtown. This was the Conti fortress. "Out!" Alessio commanded, opening her door. He dismissed the guards at the elevator. "I'll handle her from here. Stay in the lobby. No one comes up unless I authorize it." The elevator ride was silent and suffocating. As the numbers ticked upward, 40, 50, 60, Isabella felt the air pressure change. She was ascending into the sky, far away from the safety of the crowds. The doors opened directly into the penthouse. It was a sprawling space of glass and steel, overlooking the entire city. It was cold, modern, and devoid of warmth. It looked like the home of a man who didn't sleep. Alessio walked to a bar cart and poured himself a whiskey. He didn't offer her one. He took a long sip, then turned to face her. He had taken off his jacket, revealing a gun holster strapped over his white shirt. He looked exhausted, lethal, and undeniably attractive. "So," he said, leaning against the marble counter, "Isabella Rossi, the little girl who died." "I survived," she said, hugging her arms around herself. The adrenaline was fading, leaving her shivering. "You did more than survive," Alessio noted. "You hid in plain sight. You learned languages. You waited. You served coffee to the man who ordered your family's execution." He took a step toward her. "Why did you reveal yourself tonight? You had the dialect perfectly controlled. Why slip up?" "He insulted the bread," Isabella said. Alessio blinked. "What?" "He insulted the bread," she repeated, a hysterical laugh bubbling up in her throat. "He used the dialect of my village to say the bread tasted like cardboard. It was reflex. It was the only piece of home I had left. Hearing it spoken, I just answered." Alessio stared at her, and then, shockingly, he laughed. It was a dry, dark sound. "You risked a 20-year vendetta because my father is a food snob? That is incredibly Sicilian." He walked over to her, invading her personal space. He reached out, his hand hovering near her face. Isabella flinched, expecting a strike. Instead, his fingers brushed a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His touch was electric, sending a jolt through her weary body. "You're shaking," he murmured. "I'm terrified," she admitted. "Good," Alessio said. "Fear keeps you sharp." His hand moved down to her neck. He hooked a finger under the collar of her waitress uniform and pulled out the silver chain. The rusted iron key dangled between them. "Is this it?" he asked softly. "The key to the ledger?" Isabella's breath hitched. "Maybe. Maybe isn't good enough, Isabella." His voice dropped an octave, becoming rougher. "My father wants you dead. My advisors want you dead. The only reason you are breathing right now is because I am curious, and because I think you might be useful." "Useful how?" she challenged, meeting his gaze. "As a hostage?" "As a weapon," Alessio said. "You know things about the old families, things my father has forgotten. And you have this." He gestured to her, to the fire in her eyes. "You have hate. Hate is a powerful fuel." He let go of the key and walked to the window, looking out at the city. "There is a storm coming, Isabella. A new cartel from Russia is moving into Brooklyn. They don't respect the old rules. They are slaughtering my men. My father is too old to fight them. He thinks he can negotiate. He is weak." Alessio turned back to her, his silhouette framed by the city lights. "I am going to take over the family. Tonight was the beginning. My father's reaction, his fear of you, showed everyone that he has passed his prime. I saved you, and I defied him. The power has shifted. Isabella realized with a jolt that she was a pawn in a much larger game. Alessio wasn't just protecting her. He was using her to stage a coup against his own father. "So I am a trophy?" she asked bitterly. "A symbol that you control the ghost of the Rossi family?" "You are a partner," Alessio said. "If the ledger exists, it contains the locations of the safe deposit boxes my father uses to pay off the judges. Without those, the Russians will eat us alive legally. I need that book." "And if I give it to you?" Isabella asked. "What happens to me?" "Then I give you what you want," Alessio said. "Revenge. Against who? Your father?" "Against the man who actually lit the match," Alessio said. Isabella froze. "It was Salvatore. Everyone knows it was Salvatore." "Salvatore gave the order," Alessio said. "But he didn't light the fire. He didn't lock the doors. That was someone else. Someone who is still very much alive. Someone who is currently sitting on my father's council." Isabella's mind flashed back to the restaurant, to the man Alessio had shot. "Bruno?" "No," Alessio said. "Bruno is a thug. I'm talking about the man who smiled at you when you walked in. The man you served wine to for 3 months. The man who hired you," Isabella gasped. "Mr. Hensley?" "Hensley is a front," Alessio said impatiently. "I'm talking about Marco Vanzetti, my father's consigliere, the man in the grey suit who sat next to Papa tonight." Isabella searched her memory. The quiet man, the one who hadn't spoken, the one who had looked at her with cold, dead eyes. "Vanzetti wanted your father's territory," Alessio explained. "He convinced my father that Giovanni was a rat. He fabricated the evidence. He lit the fire. And now he is selling us out to the Russians." Alessio walked back to her, his face inches from hers. "Help me find the ledger. Help me prove Vanzetti is a traitor, and I will let you pull the trigger on him yourself." Isabella felt a rush of vertigo. The world was spinning. Her enemy wasn't just the monster she knew, it was a monster hiding in the shadows. "Why should I trust you?" she whispered. "You are a Conti." "Because," Alessio said, his eyes dropping to her lips for a fleeting second, "I am the only one who sees you, Isabella. Everyone else sees a waitress or a ghost. I see a queen waiting to reclaim her throne." The tension in the room snapped. It wasn't just political anymore, it was physical. The danger, the shared secret, the high stakes. It was an intoxicant. Isabella didn't back away. "If I help you, I want my father's name cleared. I want the Rossi name restored." "Done," Alessio promised. "And," she added, "I want to sleep in a bed with a lock on the door." Alessio smirked. "There are 4 guest bedrooms. Choose one. But tonight, sleep with one eye open. Vanzetti knows you're here, and he knows that if you talk, he's a dead man." Suddenly the elevator chimed. Alessio spun around, gun in hand. He hadn't authorized anyone to come up. The doors slid open. It wasn't a hit squad. It was a delivery boy, holding a large bouquet of black roses. He looked terrified to see the gun pointed at him. "Delivery for Miss Asha," the boy squeaked. Alessio snatched the flowers and checked for wires. Nothing. He ripped the card open. He read it, his face darkening. He handed the card to Isabella. The handwriting was elegant, old-fashioned script. "Welcome back to the land of the living, little ghost. I missed you in the fire. I won't miss next time. M.V. Marco Vanzetti." He knew she was here. The penthouse wasn't a fortress anymore. It was a cage. Isabella looked at Alessio. "He knows." "He's taunting us," Alessio said, crumbling the note. "He thinks he has the upper hand because the Russians are backing him." Alessio grabbed his jacket. We aren't sleeping tonight." "Where are we going?" Isabella asked. "To find that ledger," Alessio said, loading a fresh magazine into his pistol. "Before Vanzetti burns down this building with us inside it." They took the service elevator down to the sub-basement, bypassing the lobby entirely. Alessio led Isabella to a dusty, grey sedan parked in the corner. A ghost car, registered to a dead man, meant for emergencies just like this. "Get in," Alessio ordered, tossing her a heavy Kevlar vest. "Put this on under your coat. It won't stop a rifle round, but it might save your ribs." Isabella fumbled with the straps, her fingers numb. "Where are we going?" "You tell me," Alessio said, peeling out of the garage. "Where does the key go, Isabella?" Isabella clutched the rusted iron key against her chest. She closed her eyes, forcing her mind back to the terrifying night of the fire. She remembered her father shoving her into the dumbwaiter. He had pressed the key into her hand and whispered, "If I don't come back, go to where the angels sleep, Bella. Look for the weeping woman. She guards the truth." "St. Michael's Cemetery," Isabella whispered. "In Queens. My mother is buried there. And there is a memorial for my father." Alessio nodded grimly. He merged onto the highway, weaving through the late-night traffic with terrifying precision. "Vanzetti will expect us to go to a bank or a storage unit. A cemetery is risky, but it's sacred ground. Even the Russians hesitate to shoot in a graveyard." "You really think that?" Isabella asked. "No," Alessio admitted, "but I'm hoping the rain covers our tracks." A storm had broken over the city. By the time they reached the iron gates of St. Michael's, the rain was coming down in sheets, turning the world into a blur of grey and black. Alessio parked the car 2 blocks away, under an overpass. "Stay close to me," he said, drawing his weapon. "And if I tell you to run, you run. You don't look back. You don't wait for me." "I'm not leaving you," Isabella said, surprising herself. Alessio looked at her, rain dripping from his hair. In the darkness, the barrier between Prince and Waitress had completely dissolved. They were just 2 soldiers in the mud. "Then don't miss," he said, handing her a spare pistol, a compact Glock. Isabella took it. It was heavier than she expected. She didn't know how to shoot. Not really, but she gripped it like a lifeline. They scaled the perimeter fence and dropped into the maze of tombstones. The cemetery was vast, a city of the dead. Lightning flashed, illuminating the marble angels and stone crosses in strobe light bursts. "Which way?" Alessio hissed. "The older section," Isabella said, wiping rain from her eyes. "Near the mausoleums." They moved in silence, stepping over puddles, ducking behind crypts. Isabella's heart hammered against her ribs. Every shadow looked like a gunman. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. Finally, she saw it. A statue of a woman with her face buried in her hands. The weeping woman. Behind it stood a modest family crypt marked Rossi. "There," she pointed. They rushed to the crypt door. It was sealed with a padlock, but the key Isabella wore wasn't for the door. It was too small. "The key isn't for the entrance," Isabella realized, panic rising. "It's for something inside." Alessio didn't hesitate. He kicked the lock. It held. He kicked it again, harder, the wood splintering. With a final shove, the door groaned open. They slipped inside. The air was stale, smelling of wet stone and decay. Lightning flashed again, lighting up the small interior. There were 2 urns on a shelf, one for her mother, one empty one for her father. Isabella approached the empty urn. Her father had said, "She guards the truth." She looked at the statue of the angel carved into the wall behind the urns. The angel held a small book in its stone hands. On the spine of the book was a tiny keyhole. "The angel," Isabella breathed. She inserted the rusted key. It resisted for a moment, then turned with a sharp click. A mechanical whirring sound echoed in the small space. A hidden compartment beneath the shelf popped open. Inside lay a thick, leather-bound notebook. It was wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from moisture. "The ledger," Alessio said, his voice filled with reverence. He reached for it. Crack! A bullet chipped the stone angel's wing, sending marble dust spraying into Isabella's face. "Down!" Alessio roared, tackling her to the floor. Another shot rang out, blowing out the stone archway of the crypt entrance. Through the rain, Isabella saw dark shapes moving between the tombstones. Tactical lights cut through the gloom. "Vanzetti didn't wait," Alessio growled, returning fire blindly through the door. He tracked the car. "There are too many of them!" Isabella cried, clutching the book to her chest. "Stay low," Alessio commanded. He crawled to the side of the entrance, firing 2 controlled shots. A scream from the darkness confirmed a hit. "We're pinned down," Alessio said, reloading. "We need to move. If they flank us, we're dead." "The back window," Isabella said, pointing to a small, stained glass opening high on the rear wall. "I can fit." "Go," Alessio said. "I'll cover you." "No," Isabella said, grabbing his arm. "We go together." She dragged a stone bench under the window. Alessio fired a barrage of shots to keep the attackers' heads down, then boosted Isabella up. She smashed the glass with the butt of her gun and scrambled through, tumbling into the mud outside. Alessio followed a second later, grunting as he hit the ground. A bullet whizzed past his ear. "Run!" he yelled. They sprinted through the graveyard, slipping on the wet grass. Bullets chewed up the earth around their feet. They weren't running back to the car. They were cut off. They were running deeper into the cemetery, toward the train tracks that bordered the north side. They reached the embankment. A chain-link fence separated the cemetery from the rail line. "Climb!" Alessio shouted. Isabella scrambled up the fence, the wire cutting into her fingers. She vaulted over, just as a freight train roared past, its horn blaring. Alessio landed beside her. The train was moving slowly, a heavy cargo hauler. "Jump!" Alessio yelled over the noise of the wheels. He grabbed her hand, and they ran alongside the moving train. He spotted an open box car and threw Isabella inside. She landed hard on wooden pallets. She spun around, reaching out for him. Alessio made a leap, catching the metal handle. His feet dangled perilously close to the churning wheels. With a roar of effort, he pulled himself up and rolled into the car, collapsing beside her. They lay there in the darkness, gasping for breath, soaked to the bone as the train carried them away from the gunfire and into the night. The train ride ended in the Bronx, near an industrial scrapyard. They jumped off before the train slowed into the yard, rolling down a grassy embankment into a ditch. They walked for a mile until they found a payphone at a derelict gas station. Alessio made one call. 10 minutes later, a beat-up van arrived. The driver was an old man named Luca, a retired boxer who had been loyal to Alessio's grandfather. Luca drove them to a safe house, an apartment above his dusty boxing gym. It smelled of sweat and liniment, but it was warm, and the blinds were drawn. "There is food in the fridge, boss," Luca said, handing Alessio a first aid kit. "I will watch the street." Alone in the apartment, the adrenaline crash hit them both. Alessio stripped off his ruined jacket and shirt. He had a deep graze on his shoulder from a bullet, and his knuckles were raw. "Sit," Isabella said, pushing him onto the worn leather sofa. "Let me clean that." She opened the kit and began to dress his wound. Her hands, which had been trembling in the graveyard, were steady now. Alessio watched her. The shy waitress was gone. In her place was a woman who had just survived a war zone. "You did good tonight," Alessio said softly, flinching as she applied antiseptic. I didn't shoot anyone, Isabella murmured. You got the book, Alessio said. That's the only weapon that matters. He looked at the leather-bound notebook sitting on the coffee table. It looked innocuous, just an old diary. Open it, he said. Isabella finished taping his shoulder and sat next to him. She unwrapped the oilcloth. The cover was faded, the leather cracked. She opened the first page. It was gibberish, rows and rows of numbers and letters. No names, no dates, just chaotic strings of text. It's encrypted, Alessio said, running a hand through his damp hair. Damn it! Without the cipher key, this is useless. It could take a computer months to crack this. Isabella stared at the numbers. 7, 12, 1, 18, 1. She frowned. She turned the page. More numbers. But at the bottom of the page there was a small drawing, a crude sketch of a lemon tree. The lemon tree, Isabella whispered. What? My father, she said, her voice distant. When I was little, he used to sing me a song, an old Sicilian folk song about a lemon tree that grew gold instead of fruit. He would tap the rhythm on my hand to help me sleep. She closed her eyes, humming the melody. Tap, 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 tap. The rhythm, Isabella said, her eyes snapping open. It's not a complex mathematical code. It's a rhythmic cipher. The numbers correspond to the beats of the song. She grabbed a pen from the table and a napkin. She began to write, translating the numbers based on the nursery rhyme. Alessio watched in silence, barely breathing. Slowly, words began to form. January 14th, 1998. Meeting with V Shipment 404. Diverted to Brighton Beach. Payment received, $2 million USD. Account, Cayman Blue. It works, Alessio breathed. Isabella kept writing. She turned to the later pages, the ones written just days before the fire. V demands total control. He threatens the family. He admits to the poison. Isabella stopped. Her pen hovered over the paper. What is it? Alessio asked. This entry, Isabella said, her voice shaking. It's dated 3 days before your mother died. Alessio went still. His mother had died of a sudden, mysterious heart failure when he was a teenager. The doctors had called it natural causes. Read it, Alessio commanded. Isabella read aloud. Vanzetti has secured the digitalis. He plans to remove the Don's wife first. He says she is the only one who can talk sense into Salvatore. With her gone, Salvatore will be broken. He will be easy to manipulate. Silence filled the room. Heavy, suffocating silence. Alessio stood up. He walked to the window and stared out at the streetlights. He didn't scream. He didn't punch the wall. But the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He killed her, Alessio whispered. My father's consigliere. My mentor. He killed my mother to weaken my father. He turned back to Isabella. His eyes were dry, but they burned with a terrifying intensity. It wasn't just business, it was personal. He destroyed both our families. Isabella stood and walked to him. She placed a hand on his chest, right over his heart. It was beating furiously. We have him, she said fiercely. We have the proof. This book doesn't just prove he stole money. It proves he murdered the Don's wife. If you showed this to your father, Vanzetti is a dead man. My father is meeting with the Russians tomorrow morning, Alessio said. At the warehouse on the docks. Vanzetti will be there. He's planning to finalize the takeover. Then we go there, Isabella said. We walk in, and we drop this book on the table. Alessio looked down at her. The grief was still there, but something else was rising above it. A fierce, protective affection. You should leave, Isabella, he said. Take some cash from Luca. Go to California. You've done your part. Tomorrow is going to be a bloodbath. No, Isabella said firmly. I spent 20 years hiding. I'm done hiding. I'm going with you. Alessio studied her face. The shy waitress was gone forever. In her place was a Mafia queen, forged in fire. He reached out, cupping her face in his hands. You are insane, he whispered. And you are the most magnificent thing I have ever seen. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fueled by adrenaline, grief, and the looming shadow of death. Isabella wrapped her arms around his neck, pulling him closer. For a moment, the war outside didn't exist. There was only the heat of his skin, the taste of whiskey and rain, and the promise of vengeance. When they pulled apart, breathless, the air between them had shifted. They weren't just allies anymore. They were bonded. Tomorrow, Alessio said, his forehead resting against hers. We end it. Tomorrow, Isabella agreed. She looked at the clock on the wall. It was 4 a.m. The sun would rise in 2 hours. The final judgment was coming. Alessio walked to the duffel bag Luca had left. He pulled out a fresh suit, black, crisp. He tossed a black dress to Isabella, something Luca's wife must have left behind. It was simple, elegant, and severe. Dress up, Isabella, Alessio said, checking the magazine of his gun one last time. If we're going to walk into hell, we're going to look like royalty. Rain hammered the corrugated roof of the Brooklyn warehouse, sounding like war drums. Inside, Don Salvatore sat defeated, his pen hovering over a contract that would sell his legacy to the Russians. Marco Vanzetti checked his gold watch, his eyes greedy. Sign, old friend, Vanzetti urged. It ends tonight. It does, a voice thundered. The heavy bay doors groaned open. Alessio walked in, soaking wet but radiating lethal authority. Beside him stood Isabella, no longer the shy waitress, but an avenging angel in a severe black dress. Kill them! Vanzetti shrieked to the Russians, but Volkov, the Russian leader, didn't move. He saw the fire in Alessio's eyes and the heavy book in Isabella's hands. Isabella marched forward and slammed the ledger onto the metal table. The sound echoed like a gavel stroke. Hello, Marco, she said, her voice ice-cold. Do you remember this? Salvatore gasped, recognizing the cover. Giovanni's book. Page 204, Alessio commanded. Read it, Papa. Salvatore read the entry. The silence in the warehouse was suffocating. When the Don looked up, tears streamed down his weathered face. You killed Maria, he whispered, his voice trembling with a horror that quickly hardened into pure Sicilian rage. You poisoned my wife to make me weak. It was business, Vanzetti screamed, realizing his end was near. He fumbled for the gun in his waistband. Bang! Isabella didn't flinch. Her shot shattered Vanzetti's right knee. He collapsed to the concrete, howling in agony. That was for Giovanni Rossi, she stated calmly. Bang! She took his other knee. And that was for the child you burned alive. Vanzetti writhed in a pool of his own blood. Isabella lowered the weapon and looked at the Don. He is yours, Don Salvatore. For Maria. Salvatore stood up, looking 10 years younger and terrifyingly strong. He grabbed a heavy metal chair, raising it high above the traitor. In the old country, Salvatore growled, we do not waste bullets on snakes. The chair came down with a sickening crunch as the Russians looked on in silent respect. Justice had been served. And that is how the shy waitress brought the most powerful Mafia family in New York to its knees, and then raised it back up again. Isabella Rossi proved that sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest secrets, and that loyalty is stronger than blood. She went from serving the table to ruling it, not through violence alone, but through courage and the truth. What do you think? Did Don Salvatore deserve a peaceful retirement after what he did to Isabella's father, or was he just another victim of Vanzetti's lies? And would you have been able to pull the trigger like Isabella did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of revenge, romance, and Sicilian justice, please smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new story. We drop new dramas every week. Thanks for watching.